This is Jimmy Himes with WNML Radio in Knoxville. What do you think makes Tennessee's defense so special?
Well, a few things. One, they play really hard, and that's always been a staple of Rick Barnes' team since I've known him. And I first met him, I think, when he was an assistant at George Mason back in the 80s. But Rick's teams always do a great job of one, ball pressure. They put a ton of pressure on the ball, and they make it very difficult to get into offense. And with that kind of ball pressure, it also makes it difficult to make passes. And that's one of the reasons they guard the post really well, is their post defenders are obviously very good, but they also put pressure on the ball, which is the first part of post defense, of making it difficult to see in. And they do a great job of being in gaps. So their positioning really starts their help, and as a result, they're not put in rotation very much. So the ball pressure, they contain the ball very well, and they're not in rotation a lot, because once you get in rotation, that can get some defenses in trouble. And they're very good rebounding the ball and ending a defensive possession. I've always been a big fan of the way Rick does things, and his teams are extraordinarily well prepared. But he also gets guys that are relentless and playing hard, and that's a big factor in their defense and their defensive success. It's their identity, really.
And Jay, Zakai Ziegler, he leads the SEC in assists per game in SEC play only. Some think he's the best point guard in the SEC. Where would you rank him among SEC point guards?
He's right there, because he's so good defensively. It sounds less than flattering to say he's a pest, but he's really disruptive as a defender, because he's small, but that's an advantage for him in a lot of ways, because he's quick and he's strong, but he can really kind of get up underneath the defender or an offensive player as a defender, and really be disruptive that way. And with his size, he uses leverage as a defender very well. So he's really difficult to deal with. And when he's guarding you, the first thing you're concerned about is him, rather than running your team's offense. And that's a great attribute for a defender. And then as an offensive player, he's got such great speed, and he changes speeds too. But he can get by you, and when he does, he draws help and plays off that very effectively.
Thank you.
Ben, you can go ahead.
Jay, do you see something different with this Tennessee basketball team this season that could potentially help them get over the hump in March and make a deep run in the tournament?
Well, I think the issue that Tennessee and a lot of teams have is are they going to be consistent game to game in making shots? And last time I had them live was against Kentucky, and they just couldn't make any shots. Their defense was good. They held Kentucky to 30-some% from the field, and down in the 60s. I mean, it was a slugfest of a game and incredibly physical. But I mean, I'm sure Rick, there were issues that he had where they didn't defend a particular way on certain possessions, but overall, they defended well enough to win the game. Their offense didn't match their defense. They had some turnovers that led to some runouts and some easy baskets the other way, but not enough that their offense couldn't overcome it. But I actually spoke to Rick about this. We talked about it the day before the game, that for most coaches right now, their biggest concern in game to game is, are we going to be able to make shots in these games? These games are incredibly physical, and it requires making shots through contact more than I can remember in the past. But that's really sort of the issue. There's no weakness you can point to say, oh, this is going to be an impediment to Tennessee winning the national championship. The only thing I would say is game to game. Some games they knock shots down at a really high rate. In other games, it's more difficult, and they have to fight through offensive droughts. But that's not horribly unusual for teams. But That's really the thing that I would say would be of concern, but it's of concern to a number of different teams.
Christine, we can't hear you. Still can't hear you. If you want to put it in the chat, I can ask. Jimmy, you want to go ahead then?
Sure. Jay, Tennessee has used basically centers by committee with Euros and Adu and others. What are your thoughts on how effective they are with their big men?
I think they're very effective. I mean, Rick can go with a lot of different lineups, so they can play small. But when Euros is in there, he's done a really good job defensively. He's a good communicator. He does a great job ducking in the lane and getting deep post, and he can pass out of the post. He's effective with that jump hook, and he scores in his opportunities around the basket. So he's an effective big guy. I think one of the keys for Tennessee is they've got lineup versatility. They've got a lot of different guys that can play, and Olivier Camois has become a really good player, and he's improved year to year. So he's a weapon out there, especially when he catches it at the elbow or the high post. He can drive in there. Not only can he make that shot, but he can drive and get to the rim. So they've got a lot of good options. I mean, that's a really talented, good basketball team. And there aren't but a handful of teams that you would say, okay, well, they might be better than Tennessee, but it's not very many.
What do you see as key matchups between Tennessee and Texas?
Well, I mean, Texas, you have to start with the guards, because their guards are really effective and they can really score. And I think before you get there, you have to expect that it's going to be a lower scoring game, because both teams play really physical defense. They're very good at taking other teams out of transition. They're taking you out of your primary actions. So in a lot of these actions, the play after the play is what's important. Your initial action isn't going to get it for you. So getting to the second and third side of the floor, I think is going to be really important. But it's hard to make passes against both Tennessee and Texas. But those guards are really good. And then Sir Jabari Rice, who transferred in to Texas, makes a lot of impact plays in games, a really good defender. And Timmy Allen's difficult to deal with because he's in constant motion. He moves without the ball as well as just about any wing in the country.
Jay, a lot of people talk about points these days, and I guess the new era of basketball of getting up and down the floor and shooting a ton of threes. Do you still believe in the old adage that defense wins championships, or has that changed any in your mind, or just how do you kind of view that topic in general?
Well, I mean, I can't remember a bad defensive team that's won a championship, but I also can't remember an average offensive team winning it either. If you go down and go through the stats and analytics of champions, usually they're in the top 20 in offensive and defensive efficiency. That's not always the case, but when you look at teams that they might be top 10 in offense, but they're ranked 60th in defense, or vice versa, those aren't your top contenders normally, and that turned out. Look, I get the whole defense wins championship thing, and I also get when people say that you got to have great guards to win, but when you can't rebound, guards don't matter. And when you can't, you need both, and no team's won it without both. So if you don't have that sort of balance, if you're not able to score or guard at the rim, you're going to have some vulnerability.
Christine, do you want to try to go again?
Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. I just wanted to ask, this is probably one of the most open basketball landscapes we've seen since most of the blue bloods aren't really near the top as we've seen them in the past. Do you think that this is an opportunity for teams like Alabama and Tennessee to really take advantage of where they're at right now?
Yeah, I mean, Alabama and Tennessee are better this year than some of the traditional powers that you've seen. So just out of the gate, they're in better shape. But we've had years like this before. I mean, what was it, 2 years ago? Duke, North Carolina, and Kentucky were not particularly strong, and a couple of them didn't make the tournament. So this is not unprecedented, but I think we're seeing this year there are some unusual suspects that are at or near the top this year, but they've been traditionally very good. But you've always had, Kentucky, Duke, North Carolina, some other programs that have taken the lead there and have done so consistently over time. And this year, there's no dominant team that's emerged yet. But the truth is, this time last year, I don't know how many people would have said, "Yep, Kansas is going to win the national championship, and North Carolina will be in the Final Four and make the title game." There's a long way to go here, and these teams are going to get better and better. Some of these teams better and better out of public view. They're still going to practice every day and working on things. So there's a long way to go here. But I agree with you that this year feels like nobody has stood out, even though you've had Purdue's only got one loss and Alabama's only got a couple, things like that. Where there are some very talented teams, but nobody is knockout punch dominant that you can pencil them into the Final Four right now. And that's why it feels so wide open, because if some of these teams lose in the Sweet 16 or whatever, you're gonna see some brackets open up to some contenders that you might not have put near the top at the start of the tournament.
Jay, apologies if you answered this right off the top there, but I know Game Day's got a couple trips to Knoxville, both this week, really. I'm curious from your perspective personally, what makes TBA in Knoxville such a kind of a home for Game Day, and what do you personally enjoy about TBA and these volunteer basketball teams?
Well, Thompson Bowling's a great arena. I love going there. It's a great view of the game too, and Tennessee's always really good. But the fan base is fantastic, and they show up and show out. So we really enjoy being there. And Rick's been a friend for a long time, so for me, it's always fun to watch him work. And last time I was there for the Kentucky game, I spent the day there prior to the game and sat in film session with them. And I always learn a lot about the program. But it's just a great place, and it's got a special vibe. That's one of the things that makes, in my view, college basketball so unique, are the environments. And Thompson Bowling's got a fantastic environment for basketball.
Jimmy, you can go ahead again.
Jay, tell me what you think of Tennessee's depth. Certainly, that's one of the things that I think has served them well. What do you think of Tennessee's depth?
Well, first of all, I need to get this out before my wife takes a swing at me. I said so unique, and she was an English major. She's always telling me there are no gradations of unique. It's either unique or it's not. So then nothing is so unique or very unique. So I gotta clean that up. Tennessee's depth is impressive, and it gives them lineup flexibility. You can go big, you can go small, so you can match at times what opponents are doing, and then at the same time you can lead the way and make your opponent adjust to you. But being able, having Josiah Jordan James that can play multiple positions, but most importantly with their lineups, they have multiple guys that can guard multiple positions. Yeah. So at times they can switch and make things difficult on you defensively. And Tennessee does a really good job when they switch. They don't just switch to make a pickup, they switch to take something away. And they're really disruptive and physical and difficult to play against on offense. So you'd better have individual playmakers when you play against Tennessee, because you're not going to run your pattern stuff against them. They're going to take away what you do in your initial actions, and you're going to have counters to those. And as a player, you're going to have counters to the way you're guarded, because they're going to take away your strength. So you better have something to go to or it's going to be a long night. I mean, those numbers that they put up with how often they hold teams under 60 or in the 60s, and the shooting percentages they hold teams to, that's not a fluke. That's who they are. So you better be prepared for that. But their depth is impressive, and they've got a number of guys that can play, and they're getting healthier. They've had some injuries here and there, like most teams, but as they get healthy through the season, everybody's going to get banged up, but there's a difference between injury and being banged up. But as they get healthy from injury and get Josiah Jordan-James back to full strength, that makes them even better.
When Santiago Vesquey arrived here, Jay, he was a defensive liability. Now he's one of the leaders in the SEC in steals. Have you seen many guards improve defensively as much as Vesquey has?
Yeah, I mean, yes. The answer is yes, I have, but that doesn't take away how impressive that's been on Santi's part. That I think one of the things that's made him such a good defender and a good player is that he's in fantastic physical condition, and that wasn't necessarily true when he got to Tennessee. You remember this better than I do, or better than anybody really, that when he got there, I mean, he came in and started playing right away, and offensively, played very well right away. He's a very gifted player, and he's got a great understanding of how to play. And when he got there, he had an understanding of how to play on offense. But he logs as much sort of mileage in a game as any guard in the country. I mean, he's constantly running off screens and constantly, in motion on defense, and that requires great physical conditioning. And he's in great shape. And that's a trait of the Tennessee program. Their strength and conditioning and the way they take care of themselves is next level. But you have to give Vesquey a ton of credit for how seriously he takes his conditioning, because he doesn't seem to tire out there, and that shows up, I believe, late in games when he seems really fresh, when other players seem to be wearing down a little bit. He never seems to really wear down.
Adam, you can go ahead, and then we'll transition over to Rebecca and Andrea.
Hey, Jay, good to see you.
Great to see you.
I just want to ask about the transfer portal, and you look at a team like Kansas State, Keontae Johnson, and their transfers, ranked in the top 5. We've had some other teams like NC State, Georgia, Missouri that have seemed to kind of radically change their fortunes from one year to the next with the portal. But certainly Kansas State, I guess, is this just a unique time and era in college basketball where a coach can go out and turn over his roster and get experienced players and change a team's fortune from year to year?
Yes, the transfer portal has made it possible that when you take a new job, or if you have a class full of older players that leave, whether they transfer out, whether they graduate, whether they decide to turn pro, whatever it is, you can replace those players with experienced players right away. And that was never the case before. You always had to build through recruiting classes. And so there was more of a continuity to how it went, but it also required time to rebuild. And, when you took a new job, it took time to rebuild a program. That's no longer the case. Now, it may still be as difficult to put a roster together that's going to be competitive for a championship, whether in your conference or nationally. But it's not as difficult now to put a competitive team on the floor that's gonna win games and be good. It's just a question of making the right decisions with the talent available. And the hardest part, I believe, for coaches is making the decision: do you go with the talented high school player, or do you go with a seasoned veteran that may not be experienced in your way of doing things or your program, but is experienced overall? And it seems like a number of coaches have leaned toward, the super talented freshmen and going toward the more experienced players that they can get in the portal. Look, I get it. It has made roster management more of a challenge, and there are more decisions to be made now more than ever. You know, April and May are difficult months for coaches that trying to keep their roster together and decide, find out who's staying, who's going, and re-recruiting your current players, which they never had to do before, and making decisions on players that are available and getting to know them as quickly as possible, so you can make intelligent decisions. But look, I get it that there are issues with the portal that can be better regulated. Most notably, the timing of when players make decisions to go into the portal and things like that can be better managed. But what I don't get is the constant complaining of the coaches about it, that it just strikes me as odd that the players would be subject to the equivalent of a non-compete provision in an employment contract when they're unpaid by their schools. So I believe immediate eligibility for a player that transfers is entirely appropriate, and that should be the case. And one of the great things about the portal that doesn't get talked about enough is you have so many of these players that have played on the quote unquote mid-major level that have been really successful and essentially played in anonymity, and they transfer to the quote unquote higher level where they're on national television all the time and they're impact players and they become nationally known. And why shouldn't those players be allowed, just because they were under recruited out of high school or not properly evaluated, whatever the case may be, why should they be relegated to that for their entire college career? I think it's entirely appropriate that they be allowed to do that. Just as a coach at that level has a great season and moves up a level. The coaches do that all the time. And I realize there are differences in players and coaches, but I've never felt like the year in residence, sitting out a year, was right. It only applied to 5 sports, and everybody else could be immediately eligible. So it never made any sense to me. So I'm happy that the players have this option, but I do agree that it could be better regulated so that that there's a little more certainty as to when these decisions are made.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank
Okay,
you.
last one for you. What are your thoughts on the dual game day show in Knoxville this week, and just what it means to the overall game day brand to have 3 added women's shows this year?
It's awesome. I mean, I think the game day franchise, whether it's football, women's basketball, men's basketball, is a showcase for the game. And there's nobody better in our business than Rebecca Lobo, and that whole crew is just spectacular. And I have the privilege of working with Holly Rowe and Noelle Duncan very well, and they're spectacular. So it's nothing but good news. More coverage of basketball is better, and they do it. I'm sorry to say they do it better than us, but they do. So I'm a fan.
Thank you,
Great.
Jay.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate your time
Appreciate it.
today.
Thank you.
Thank you.